Ghost in the Shell is one of my all-time favourite anime franchises. I would have a hard time finding a movie that created such an immersive and accurate sci-fi world as Ghost in the Shell. This movie pretty much gave birth to a genre. You can find traces of it in pretty much every post-1995 sci-fi anime, so you can imagine how excited I was when I started watching Psycho Pass, a series that has an almost identical premise to Ghost in the Shell. Did it do the genre justice? Did it create its own path? Or did it just end up a hollow copy and paste of the 1995 classic? Well, let's find out in this review. Like I said, Psycho Pass has an almost identical premise to Ghost in the Shell. It's set in the not too far away future, where AI and cyber body parts play a big role in society. We follow a division of the police force as they tackle the many problems that stem from our new artificially intelligent friends. You can probably see the similarities already, but some will argue that it doesn't really matter where you get your inspiration. Everything was inspired from something else, but it is something to note when watching Psycho Pass. For me, it did take the edge off the story. I had the feeling that I'd watched it all before. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, nor did I give it a lower score because of this. It was just a bit off-putting. But these initial fears were put on hold during the first few episodes of the show. They throw you right into the action during episode 1. It introduces us to most of the characters, and more importantly, the bigger plot point, the Dominators. The Dominators are guns that decide whether someone is guilty or not, and how they should be punished. The gun will decide whether to kill, paralyse, or let someone go. This is the main question brought up in the story. Should we allow machines to make moral decisions, even though they have no conscience? Well, that's what I was hoping for anyway. Unlike Ghost in the Shell, Psycho Pass never really delves into this question. It never really stops to ponder what's right or wrong. In fact, the characters seem almost unaware. It just brings up the question and then moves on with the story. This happens a lot on the show. Sometimes characters will just quote random philosophers and then continue the conversation like nothing happened. Doing this, they make the characters and story seem really dumb. No one really seems to have a true understanding of the world they're living in. And not in a good way. Like I said, they don't stop to think about their society. The story just brings it up, drops it and runs away. This was quite a disappointing realisation for me. In a matter of a few episodes, the show turned into a dark world with a lot of potential to just another shallow sci-fi show. Even towards the end of the show, when we're really meant to think about the system they have in place, the story focuses more on finding the bad guys and saving the day, rather than looking at the bigger picture. I really did think Psycho Pass was going to be more than just an action show, but it turned out to be just that. And some people like that. Some people don't mind watching a group of people with sci-fi guns chasing criminals for 22 episodes. But I've seen it all before. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not going to stick out from all the other sci-fi shows. So if you take away the overall story of Psycho Pass, it doesn't fall apart like most other shows. They still manage to have a few entertaining arcs in the story. I would have liked them to keep up with the dark theme of the first few cases, but the cases they did show us were all pretty entertaining. I have to say, I much preferred the first half of the show. I feel like Psycho Pass works much better when they're only dealing with 3 or 4 episode long story arcs. The other thing Psycho Pass started off really well was the world they built. The world is just as important as the characters in the story when creating an anime. And Psycho Pass done a great job of showing off the world to start with. But like the story, the world started to crumble when exposed to little analysis. The whole point of Psycho Pass is to show us how society will react when they're controlled by computers. But they make a huge mistake when trying to pull this off. They focus way too much on the police, so they end up neglecting the civilians. The civilians seem empty and one-dimensional. You never really get to see any emotion or reaction from them. This show would have been so much better if they spent time building the world and showing us how society reacts to their situation. Instead, we aren't really shown any of the civilians until one of the later arcs, and even then it just seems like empty puppets. The world just didn't feel dynamic. Nothing seemed to change throughout the series. None of the events happening seemed to really have an effect on society, which is a big thumbs down when the whole show is about society. Going into Psycho Pass, I was expecting an in-depth story about how our society would function under the rules of computers, how normal people would react and how it would change their lives. Instead, I got a non-dynamic world that didn't seem to notice what was going on. The only time I felt like I was getting what I wanted was when they randomly quoted Plato's ideals of society, only to then forget about it and move on, making the whole story seem shallow and pretentious. I don't think Orobuchi has made a bad show here. but he just showed us that he probably should just stick to making good action shows like Fate Zero, and leave the deeper anime about society to people like Mamoru Oshii and Katsuhiro Otomo. Before I get into the characters, I want to start by saying I enjoyed the characters. They weren't too forgettable, and they were fun to watch. In a lot of anime, the characters get neglected and are instantly forgotten after I finish watching it. With Psycho Pass, the characters did stick out, but like the rest of the series, cracks do start to show when put under an analytical magnifying glass. Psycho Pass goes for the classic bad guy good guy formula. The good guys are innocent and likeable, and the bad guys are cunning and sinister. In the good guys we have all the members of the police. We have a variety of different ages, personalities and skill levels. And in the bad guys we have a mixture of different villains. They all have different motives and reasons for being bad guys. I don't mind shows taking the classic good guy bad guy route, but it does make the show look a little bit more unoriginal, something Psycho Pass suffers from a lot. Although the characters are presented like this, I got the feeling that they maybe wanted me to choose who to go for. Since this anime is all about right and wrong, that makes sense. But it wasn't clear, I was never sure if I was meant to or if it was just bad character development. Our main character was meant to be Akane. She was meant to be a relatable newbie guiding you through the story. I was pulled more towards the other characters rather than Akane. She really suffered from being a generic female protagonist. She was weak, she made bad decisions, she was clumsy, and she had to rely on the other characters for most of the show. To be honest, I was expecting more. They took so much inspiration from Ghost in the Shell, but they left out probably one of the most important parts, the female lead. In Ghost in the Shell, she's a strong, independent, skilled female character, who breaks all the anime stereotypes females fall victim to. But in Psycho Pass, I'd seen this character loads of times before, so naturally I was drawn to the next in line character, Kogami. He's quite wild, he doesn't play by the rules, and he has an attitude. Not the most original concept for a police show, but it worked nicely. I found myself rooting for this character the most, and not really caring about the rest. I think this was because Kogami felt much less like a puppet than the rest of the cast. Everybody in the police force just seemed to take orders from the higher-ups without question, even when those orders were clearly wrong and against human nature. The other characters felt empty, while Kogami felt alive. This isn't just a problem with the police, but with the whole story. The writing contradicted itself by giving us so obviously evil characters, building up our hatred for them, then making them look like they're doing the right thing. Like I said before, I'm not sure if this was done on purpose or by mistake. Either way, they just ended up confusing me. I agreed more with the villain's motives. He wanted to make humanity independent and stop people from relying on computers. But then he would have an arc where he would just randomly and brutally murder innocent people without any real motives. Legend of the Galactic Heroes does this the best. It gives you two sides, but it doesn't force the good guys down your throat. It lets you decide who you want to back, which is obviously the more realistic way of writing. I get the feeling Psycho Pass wanted to do this, but kind of failed. They made the main villains way too generic and evil, so in the end I couldn't sympathise with them at all. Yes, another almost good aspect of Psycho Pass ruined by a few small mistakes. In terms of the other side characters, they were pretty good. Considering the quality of side characters we normally get from current anime, these were pretty good. If you look at the most popular show to come out last year, Attack on Titan, the characters were just an afterthought, and would end up either forgotten or killed to create fake drama, so I have to give Psycho Pass some credit for making its side characters somewhat justified. The animation is easily Psycho Pass's best aspect. It was why I was so excited when I started watching it. The dark rainy side passes with busy detail really reminded me of the great dystopian cities from classic anime. But Psycho Pass has a modern twist. The budget was obviously quite high, and they made good use of it. There were some great city shots and some of the backgrounds were really well done. It captured the atmosphere of the city really well. The city looked big and busy but lacked any kind of personality, which was suiting considering the plot. They made everything look futuristic, but also believable. I particularly liked the design and execution of their guns. They had to make them look unique and futuristic, and they done a great job. It looked like something I could genuinely believe. and they made good use of the 3D animation without taking it too overboard. One criticism I would have would be the character designs. They were mostly plain jackets with shirts and ties. I know it was meant to be dark and gloomy, but they could have made some of the character designs more unique. Also, Psycho Pass probably suffers from the worst case of anime hair I've ever seen. Some of the characters look like they were straight from a Final Fantasy game. The OST was composed by Yugo Kanno. No, not Yoko Kanno, Yugo Kanno. Chances are you've probably not heard much from her before. She doesn't really do much anime, but she's done a great job with this one. The soundtrack is pretty standard when it comes to sci-fi action. There's a lot of epic scores with some fitting electro tracks. Most of this show is fast paced, so the soundtrack worked well, though after a few tracks it does start to sound quite repetitive. It sounds like the same track just slightly remixed, which isn't that noticeable when watching the anime, but when listening back it can sound a bit boring. Overall, the OST was done pretty well and really suited the setting of the show. As you can tell, there's a lot to talk about with Psycho Pass. It was a really great anime to watch and review. There was nothing I felt I didn't need to comment on. So overall, it was quite an enjoyable show. It was by no means one of the best I've watched, and it didn't come close to its sci-fi grandparents, but it was enjoyable to watch. I feel like it could have done a lot more with its story and characters, and maybe expanded on its themes, but compared to the nonsense that comes out these days, I quite enjoyed Psycho Pass. It's just one of those shows that didn't cope well under analysis. I would pretty much recommend this to anyone. It's easy to watch, and despite the amount of references, you don't need any knowledge of philosophy or computing. If you did enjoy Psycho Pass and are looking for something else more complete, then check out 1995's Ghost in the Shell. It's an absolute masterpiece in every department, and it's responsible for inspiring most of our anime today. Akira has a similar weight, it's very high quality and extremely influential. I would consider both of these to be must-watches for all anime fans. I hope you enjoyed my review of Psycho Pass. If you did, be sure to click the like button. Also, I created a Facebook page, so if you want you can check out that in the description and maybe give it a like. Also, if you want to see more reviews, you can click subscribe or click on the screen. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.